Some of you may have heard of the Great Reset.
What's the what is the Great Reset?
Reset.
So that...
Is it a version of the New World Order? Is that what they're changing the name to?
You know how I feel about political outlooks and differences in political outlooks. I don't think it's a weakness. I think it's a strength. And I think America needs to get back to being able to have a conversation with people who don't agree. We learn so much from each other when we do that. You, I think, are going to hear and learn and question and disagree, or perhaps really agree, like very few podcasts will push you to. You're going to learn an awful lot.
Highly advanced electromagnetic technologies are being used on the population under a corrupted, dark agenda.
But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
The shadow government is a multi-headed hydra.
The part of the shadow government I expose the most is the military and intelligence agency sources, who develop the advanced technology behind the scenes in black projects and use it profoundly unethically on the population.
We're developing a society because of all of these different toxins known to affect brain function. We're seeing a society that not only has a lot more people of lower IQ, but a lot fewer people of higher IQ. In other words, a dumbing down, a chemical dumbing down of society. So everyone's sort of mediocre. That leaves them dependent on government because they can't excel. We have these people of lower IQ who are totally dependent.
Well, it's been true since 1933. You see, you had a man in a wheelchair running for governor of New York named Franklin D. Roosevelt, Delano Roosevelt, and he was the grandson of the most successful opium dealer in Hong Kong named Warren Delano. And of course, the Delano Roosevelts. Well, what has happened in this country and over the world is we have reverted through the world order. We've reverted to the Middle Ages. We have a feudal system now in which you might say futile system because of the way it works, but it's a feudal system.
It shows you the one with all the squiggly lines, the global giants corporations. Those are the 17, and they control 41 trillion, and they're all invested in each other. So the 41 trillion, 403 billion is invested in each other. So they're all collectively invested in that this $40 trillion becomes one large, super connected global capital structure. You'll see that the $17 trillion companies, there's 3 more new giants that by 2018 have been added into the trillionaires. And then there's 9 near giants who are all in excess of 800 billion. So if you put those all together, we're talking about 30 big companies that control in excess of $50 trillion worth of wealth. So we're starting to talk about a quarter of all the wealth in the world concentrated in one place.
So the Rothschilds said, well, hang on and we'll see what we can do. So they got Herbert Hoover to inaugurate the German Relief Commission. But since we were at war with Germany, they couldn't well call it the German Relief Commission, so they called it the Belgian Relief Commission.
Oh, yes. Well, in fact, the United States government in Washington has carried out many of Hitler's policies, which he was unable to do because he didn't rule long enough.
And they continue to do that. So the giants have no conscience in terms of where the money's invested. It's just wherever it can be the best returns.
These are vast territories. He could rule with practically no army. And the answer was, he said, The reason he was so pro-communist at that time was because the communists collected their debts at the point of a gun, which he didn't say. They had discovered during the 1920s that adding sodium fluoride to the drinking water.
Speaking of carrying water, while the Times writes hit pieces on people speaking out on the Great Reset, guess who's actively sitting on panels over at the World Economic Forum?
And when he spent years of studying the situation in 8 languages all over Europe, he found out that bankers make wars to create debt. We went to war against Germany in World War I and World War II at a time when by census 52% of the population of the United States was of German origin. So this was like a civil war.
As a conspiracy theorist, I really suck because they seem to happen.
We've got to defeat Hitler, and we've got to defeat communism. We've got to defeat Nazism. Well,
1933.
Our drone. A man with a pipe to me.
He had on his plans to bomb the nation of Yugoslavia before he attacked Russia, because he knew that he had to knock off the Slavic population in Yugoslavia before he would be able to attack Russia. And so a loyal Nazi named President Bill Clinton finally carried out Hitler's plan of attacking Yugoslavia, and he bombed it into oblivion.
Now, that tells you that it's not reflecting the sun's light. It's producing its own, and its light is different from the sun's. So, you know, the scientific community have not told us this, because they won't tell us this, because it destroys this idea that the sun is, is lighting up the moon.
Now, if you try to think about $1 trillion, I mean, it's really kind of an amazing thing to even think about. The entire U.S. military empire and NATO together, all the bases around the world, all the military wars and things we're doing, does not exceed $1 trillion.
Blimey. What is it, Fuhrer? Funny, I thought I had 2.
Herbert Hoover and his pals who ran this operation, they all came out of it multimillionaires, and Herbert Hoover several times remarked very sourly, some of these days some prying SOB is going to want to look at our books. Well, no one ever did. And Saddam himself, is worth about $10 billion. He's a player on the world scene. And that's why when George was ranting about getting rid of the new Hitler and he sent our army over there to do it, they walked away leaving Saddam Hussein in total control. I don't think he ever heard a gunshot fired during that entire Iraqi war. But to get back to George, he didn't start out with the CIA. He started out as an agent, a secret agent of the CIA, who was running his own oil company called Zapata Oil Company. And, George, when he wanted a name for his company, he wanted a name that really represented what he believed in. So he didn't call it the Thomas Jefferson Oil Company, and he didn't call it the George Washington Oil Company. He looked down at Mexico, where you had a communist revolutionary named General Emiliano Zapata. And Emiliano was quite a bloodthirsty guy. His idea of a good time was to go into a village and line up all the women and children and shoot them. So George said, this is my kind of guy. So he named his oil company Zapata Oil Company, which showed the kind of people that he would like to have around him. And the Zapata Oil Company was never anything but a front for the CIA. They did a lot of work in Mexico and in the Gulf of Mexico for the CIA. And of course, when you had the supposed attack against Castro to wipe out communism in Cuba, George was in on the planning, and of course they bought 2 ships to haul the fighters, freedom fighters, to Cuba, and they named one of them Barbara after his wife, and they named the other ship Zapata after his oil company. So George was pretty well inside all the way, and of course they never intended to overthrow Castro. You see, the guy who helped him first was Herbert Hoover. After they sent him money, Wilson sent him money, and then they said, we don't have any food. So Herbert Hoover, the great engineer who was a Rothschild employee, after he had been banned for life from the London Stock Exchange as a thief and an embezzler, and the Rothschilds said, boy, we want this guy on our side. Sure. So they hired him as a director of Rio Tinto Zinc, one of their family firms. And the Belgians were suddenly were astounded to find out that they were all starving when they had just had the best crop year they ever had. And in fact, this great massacre of the Russian peasants in the early 1930s was deliberately suppressed by Walter Duranty, the chief correspondent in Russia of the New York Times, that was to give official diplomatic recognition to Soviet Russia so we could send them even more money of taxpayers' money than they'd been doing before.
This government, the United States of America government, was involved in by the fact that they supported communism in other parts of the world, namely the Soviet Union at that time.
And whenever someone in Washington points this out, why they would have to point it out, I don't know, because all you got to do is turn this phony broadcasting system on, and you can see it for yourself. But
right? Yes, the media is lying to you exactly as you say the media is lying to you. Mayor Jenny and Mayor Ted Wheeler in Seattle and Portland are completely out of control. Everyone who failed to talk about that in real terms is completely out of control. Right. You're not wrong about everything, Magistan, by far. I'm not even positive that the election, we're in a situation in which the MAGA people have to be reached by somebody who hasn't gone along with the lies.
Many of our young people have no concept of what an inquisition is. It is when a religious force moves in with such power, deception, and cruelty that it destroys everything standing in its way. The Christians of today are like little blades of grass growing up in the sunshine, and there's a big lawnmower coming towards them, and it's singing hymns.
We live in a world of overabundance, yet the gap between the rich and the poor continues to dramatically deepen. The 26 richest people on the planet now hold the same wealth as the 3.8 billion poorest, 50% of the population. Occupy Wall Street popularized the term the 1%, the notion of a nebulous ruling elite that holds a wildly disproportionate concentration of wealth and power at humanity's expense.
All 32 members of the G30 have been keynote speakers at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Of the 17 most connected money management firms, there's 6 that are directly on the board of directors of those from the G30.
I'm in good shape. 78 years old, 82 after 4 years.
No, because facts no longer matter. Questioning will not happen.
Encourage them, have social movements that really stress the inequality. Find the ones that support of massive civil wars and revolutions. Encourage them, and it doesn't matter what it is. People in the streets in massive kinds of ways saying, we want the concentration of wealth stopped, we want billionaires stopped, we want to tax their money. You can be a millionaire. We'll let you stay, wealthy, but we want all those resources put into humanitarian purposes for the world.
AKA the Great Reset. Even bigger. I wonder what you would say if I could prove that very top members of Joe Biden's cabinet are actually part of this, not just like selling it. They believe in it. They're knee-deep or neck-deep in it.
This world is very different from what most people think it is. There are very powerful people who essentially rule this world right now. And the ordinary person is a slave in this world. And slaves aren't educated. They're taught what they need to, or, they need to know. That's it. They're not taught truth. They're taught what they need to know.
The baseless, again, conspiracy theory known as the Great Reset
Wealth concentration is happening so massively that someday it's very feasible that one person will hold more wealth than half the humans in the world.
Now that sounds pretty nuts. And it would be if that was anything like.
The billionaires are similar to colonial plantation owners. They know they are a small minority with vast resources and power. Yet they must continually worry about the unruly exploited masses of
American people
rising in rebellion.
Clearly spell out how they plan to kick off fundamental changes to society and capitalism, American people, AKA the Great Reset.
Rising in rebellion.
Which is theirs.
At that time, you will have the opportunity to pledge your allegiance to the prince.
So they say billions and billions of dollars. Now I think they're starting to think rather seriously. 62 people hold as much wealth as half the world. At the beginning of 2017, 8 people controlled more wealth than half the world.
The economic mark.
A group of world leaders orchestrated the pandemic to take control of the global economy.
And those that refuse to receive the mark will be considered outside the New World Order and an enemy of the state. Any questions?
Will the BBC and the other outlets retract this angle of attack?
And, the myth about the great fortunes of this country is that these were hard-working people who saved their money and built important businesses. The fact is, most of the old family money in this country came from dealing in drugs and dealing in slaves, the slave trade and the world opium trade.
But it's no less ridiculous than nothing exploding and becoming something. If you look at it objectively,
And I don't know how to say this. We have to go non-coercive, we have to respect our past, and we got to get the boot of oppression off the number of people who can't figure out. I feel like I did almost everything right. I did not have the career that I was expecting.
This collectivist mindset is foundational to communism, fascism, and socialism. The common good before the individual good, proclaimed one of collectivism's most infamous adherents.
Issue with Donald Trump. Let me tell you something. Baby boomers do not like to be told to leave the workforce when it's time.
The doctrine of collectivism has been put into practice by many dictators such as Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao. Death, destruction, and suffering on a mass scale was the end result in each case.
We got rid of mandatory retirement in all sorts of places in the 80s.
How does placing the good of society above the good of the individual tend towards such unfortunate outcomes?
And in part, that's because the boomers didn't have enough wealth. And as a result, everybody else is in a holding pattern. And right now, the principal emergency is that we've got a ton of young men and young women who need to form families and homes.
Is it not a display of compassion to sacrifice our personal interests for the greater good of our society? At first glance, collectivism may seem to be a virtuous position to take.
And I don't care whether it's 2 dudes raising a kid, or 2 chicks, or 2 people who are non-binary, but a continuing society is all about babies.
As a society is a concept, it cannot think, act, speak, or choose, and therefore, an individual or a group of individuals must be granted the ability to define the so-called societal greater good, and then granted the power to force individuals to act in service of this good. Since the dawn of civilization, it has been ruling classes who anoint themselves the arbiters of the greater good, and so not surprisingly the greater good, more often than not, merely amounts to the good of those in power. A single person, I need hardly say, is something subordinate, and as such he must dedicate himself to the ethical whole. Hence, if the state claims life, the individual must surrender it. All the worth which the human being possesses, he possesses only through the state.
And creating the preconditions where people wish to keep their society going so that people will care enough to sacrifice in their life for a legacy.
But on closer investigation, a philosophical error called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness corrupts the practical application of this ideology.
because you're trying to make sure that nobody has a future, that there is no history of who cared and who did and who won for you. What you're stopping the loop of sacrifice. We need to make sacrifice worthwhile, maybe not directly, but at least indirectly.
The fallacy of misplaced concreteness occurs when one treats what is merely an abstraction as an entity that exists in the real world.
Made the people very passive. By adding sodium fluoride to the drinking water, he could reduce his guards by an average of 4. You only need 1 in 4, 25% instead of 100%, which comes to quite a bit of money.
Wait for it. They think that lockdowns are necessary for tackling climate change. Lockdowns are good. Stop people using transport. That's good. Empty the streets. And hey presto, climate change is solved. Don't believe me? Well, have a listen to this and I'll read out the subtitles just to underline them of their latest ad.
If you want to start a war with Iraq, go out and try to do it. It's very tough. And it takes years of hard work. So Bush had a great advantage because his father was head of the Central Intelligence Agency and a worldwide drug distribution operation. So he had plenty of money and plenty of political influence. He had no problem at all to walk in there.
Collectivism, in claiming the individual must sacrifice his or her private interests for the sake of society, takes what is merely a concept, society, and treats such a concept as if it had a concrete existence. But as Carl Jung points out, society is nothing more than a term, a concept for the symbiosis of a group of human beings. A concept is not a carrier of life. In contrast to the individual that has a real existence in the world, society is an abstraction used to represent an ever-changing collection of individuals living and interacting in proximity. As far and as wide as one looks, one will never find a concrete entity called society that we can point to and identify in the manner analogous to how we can identify an individual. Society does not exist apart from the thoughts and actions of people. It does not have interests and does not aim at anything. The same is valid for all other collectives. Or as Carl Jung put it, the nation, like the state, is a personified concept. The nation has no life of its own apart from the individual and is therefore not an end in itself. All life is individual life, in which alone the ultimate meaning is to be found.
For a legacy, when you start taking down all statues, not just the statues that were put up as a finger in the eye of somebody else, and there were statues that were put up in that way.
And Woodrow Wilson, who was born about 3 blocks from where we're sitting, initiated this system of financing the Soviet Union in 1917. When he voted, Congress voted him a special emergency war fund of $100 million, which at that time was the same as about $1 trillion at that time, to prosecute the war against Germany. And he took $10 million of that, 1/10 of it, and sent it to Russia to help the Bolsheviks in Russia. And I could give you many parallels of government action in the last 25 years, which is carrying out the policies of Adolf Hitler.
Yes. Tell me, Grayson, who is this Mr. Hitler? Who are his friends? And to what social class does he belong?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because I just made a short film telling us all about class to which he belongs.
Bush family has very deep ties to Nazi Germany. Bankers and politicians and political leaders and the people of Arkansas, Colonel Mandel House, whose father was a Rothschild agent during the Civil War.
Ironically, this extreme accumulation of concentrated capital creates a continuing problem for investors. They have to scour the world for new investment opportunities that will not yield adequate return, that will yield adequate returns on capital. So they got more capital, they got places to invest it in with a positive return. So the concentration of wealth and power at this level tends to overaccumulate in the hands of increasingly fewer elites to the point that capital has limited safe investment opportunities. There's three mechanisms for investing this excess capital. One, they'll do risky financial speculations like the subprime mortgage loans, which almost collapsed the entire system in 2008. They will continually buy up public institutions and try to privatize everything, electric companies, water, roads, schools. I'm waiting for churches to become privatized. Well, in some ways they are.
I mean, nobody's there because they want to be.
There's not too many people involved in this. I mean, literally, it's a money-making scheme.
Don't be foolish. They're condemning themselves to death.
Don't make a mistake.